Sometimes Judaism requires us to do hard things. Why? Why do we push ourselves out of our comfort zone to do hard things for Judaism? Interestingly enough, this is the question that Esther had to grapple with in the Purim story. Welcome back. I'm Gila Ross, host of the Power Up podcast, where we share short, relatable insights from the Torah to create more love, more meaning, and more joy in your life. And in this episode, we're going to look at what made Esther the heroine Esther and how that is something we can bring into our own lives. Welcome. It is nice to have you all join us. The title of tonight's class is Purim, Queen Esther, and Your Place in Judaism. Okay, now I want to ask you a question. Has anyone here ever had to do something hard for Judaism, like had to kind of fight a little bit for Judaism? It was very interesting to hear people's responses.
Hard for Judaism. I think we've had this conversation before, haven't we?
Have we?
I don't know.
It's always good when people remember the conversations more than I do.
Like Brit Miller is one of them. I think that's a very hard decision. Having two boys, you've got boys. I don't know what you've got, but I feel like those are decisions that actually you don't really necessarily want to make, or you might not necessarily disbelieve in the mitzvah, but the actual concept of it doesn't always sit right.
Yeah, there are a lot
yeah.
of Jewish parents whose the only reason that they do a Brit Milah is because it is a mitzvah, right? Myself included, right? The only reason for me, it was never should I or shouldn't I. I always knew if I was going to have boys, I was going to give them a Brit Milah. But like if I think back to before I had my oldest son, like I was where I was, and I would never, if we weren't Jewish, I would never have given him one, right? And it is for a lot of Jewish mums, it's a very hard mitzvah to do. You know, you're postpartum, it's a brand new baby, and so yes, that is definitely something hard.
I think when I had Sophia, Dan was relieved that she was a girl. Then we decided to have another one, and that was a bit of a bonus.
Yeah,
I think he convinced himself that he was a girl.
Right.
But actually it was different because it was just coming out of the pandemic, so I think it was more private. It wasn't such a public affair, so it felt a bit more controlled.
Yeah,
you know, not bragging about it type thing. It sounds weird that, but and with Sam we had a pigeon oven, so we were able to kind of keep the bris a bit smaller. I know it's just, I don't know, Dan never. It was something we'd never not do.
Right,
something that never really.
But it was because you were Jewish. It's interesting, yeah, because my Yitzi was born during my pandemic, and he was born in May, so it was like high up to the pandemic, and it was just the family for the bris. It was so nice.
Because you at the beginning, Jane was at the end with the
right.
Part.
Yeah, so mine was.
So how do we do? Because I'm supposed to have a minion. So how does it?
You do not need a minion. Apparently, you don't need it. Well, I mean, we literally had. It was my husband, my oldest son, who was 16 at the time, and the mohel who was in the room. I chose not to be in the room, and like that's it. The other kids, I don't remember where they were. They weren't, but it was a nicer. I felt like it was like the first one that I just didn't feel like, wow, that's crazy. But anyway, anything else that we've done or will do? And you know what? There's lots of things. And it doesn't matter what your religious levels are, right? Like for most people, you know, at some point you do something hard because it's Jewish, because you're Jewish, right? Whether it's choosing to send your kids to a Jewish school, and if that's what you choose to do, and to pay tuition, right? However much you do or don't pay, right? Anti-Semitism in the workplace, right? There are some people that yesterday when we were talking about it, there were some people that were talking about like, having to take off, right? Whether you take off Yom Kippur or whether things, right? Especially if you're taking off, firstly, you have to stand up for yourself and ask for that time off, which is not always easy, especially if it's at the beginning of a job or whatever. And sometimes you have to take that time out of your annual leave, which is also hard, right? Why? Why do we do hard things for Judaism?
It's the pride of who you are.
Okay, it's the pride of who you are. It's interesting because I wasn't. I don't hear that answer often. It's a beautiful answer, but I don't hear that answer often.
Yeah, I think there's some things you do because you've always done it,
Yeah.
and I think some things you do because you genuinely want to and believe in it. And I
Okay.
think it's hard to sometimes differentiate those things depending on what they are. So, like, why do you take 2 days Rosh Hashanah off? Some people might say because I've always have, or some people say because I genuinely, believe. And like you
Okay.
said, I feel pride in doing whatever.
Hi, Maddie.
I think it
Sorry.
just depends, isn't it? Some things you do because you just do, and some things you do because you want to do.
It's interesting following on that because being Jewish, you accept things as you said.
Yeah.
But with Ariel, my oldest, he questions everything. Why do we do that? And it's more, but you don't always have the answer because it's just always been the norm. And then when you ask that question, you actually have to think, why do we actually do this and do that?
Yeah,
So,
but that's good though. I think that's a good mind to ask, because we don't ask sometimes. I think I was definitely brought up with you just do, and even my parents just did.
Yeah.
And I think now we're of that generation where it is, we can ask why.
Right, and it's not good. Like, our kids generally don't just do because we said so, right?
Yeah.
Not my kids anyway, right? Like, which the truth is, look, that is the generation of maybe it works for us somewhat. I don't know if it works for us that do it because I said so, but it's definitely not working for our kids, right? They don't just do things because we tell them. So if they can come to us and ask their questions and say, but like, why? Then it's a different place, because then they're able to have that conversation with you, right? So any other reasons just besides aside from proud to be Jewish? Guilt. So let's talk about it.
For that one.
I was waiting for how did you know? Let's talk about it, because what discussion about Judaism and Jewish continuity would be complete without the Jewish guilt, right? Yeah. What is it? Let's invite it to the table.
I just think guilt's everywhere, isn't it?
Okay.
There's always that guilt about 6 million died because of. There's always that that Holocaust thing in the back, and it's part of our kind of way. It's funny because years ago I was chatting to a non-Jewish person, and I can't remember what the conversation was about, and he said Holocaust history is really big in your community, isn't it? Really big in your culture. And I actually never really thought about it, because it's just something we do however we do it. And I said, yeah, I guess so it is. It's just part of you, and we seem to sometimes forget biblical history, but other history we seem to not really.
It's true.
Yeah,
it is true. And it's a whole different discussion on its own. The Holocaust. Sorry, did you?
No,
listening. Right. The Holocaust. But let's focus on the guilt for a second, right? And I'm not getting into whether it's healthy or not healthy, because I actually don't. I actually think I'll just put it out there that passing on Judaism because you got to be Jewish because 6 million died is not a healthy way to pass on Judaism. It's not a healthy way to live Judaism. But for a lot of us, it's a reality, right? That there is kind of like the guilt that we kind of subconsciously buy into, that like 6 million died and therefore what? So what is the therefore? What is the guilt there that's kind of put into us from when we were young?
Maybe it's because you want to continue the tribe, as you would say. It's just if we just go and just assimilate and all that we're just going to disappear. Whereas, and you think that 6 million people died for being Jewish, or even not even acknowledging they were Jewish, but because they had that lifeline, you just got to be there so that we can continue.
Right. So you've actually what you said is fantastic, right? Because what you basically said is what drives the right. You can't be the one to break the chain. What drives, although Ilana, it's slightly different than that. Ilana's saying you can't be the one to break the chain, but a lot of time what drives the guilt about the Holocaust is the fear that we come from a long line of Judaism. Our ancestors suffered terribly. Think about the Holocaust. And if we don't fight for Judaism, if we don't make an active decision to bring Judaism into our life, then it could, the fear is that we will all assimilate and there will not be a Jewish future, right? I think that's, would you agree that that's the driving force behind the Jewish guilt? The Jewish guilt is that, like, if we don't opt into Judaism, what's going to be with the Jewish future?
I don't know. I think the guilt is probably the fact that people died because of being Jewish, or, like you said, not even acknowledging, and we're basically they've died in vain if you don't continue. And I think that there's definitely that rhetoric isn't kind of, they went through this because they were Jewish. We owe it to them to actually practice Judaism.
Right, which is it's an interesting thing. Let's get back to it. It's an interesting one because we don't necessarily say it with other things, right? You know what? Let's just say it now because I think it's an interesting point. Is that we don't say, for example, that people died surfboarding, for example, so therefore we should all start surfboarding, right? I'm saying that there's something there's again. I think as Ilana said, there's a long line of Judaism. Mm-hmm. There's this inherent feeling that Judaism is important, right? And that as a Jewish people, we have the obligation, the responsibility to uphold it and pass it on, right? And there's the fear that if we don't, then what's going to be with the Jewish future? Now, it's interesting because I don't know how much you do or you don't know about the Purim story, but this comes up in the Purim story, and I think it's a very, very relevant part of the Purim story. And it's before we moved to Manchester, we used to live in Western Canada, and the way it is in North America is every Jewish community has it's not the Fed. The Fed is in the UK. Federation, Jewish Federation, right? Which kind of Jewish Federation kind of generally oversees, supports fundraisers centrally for the Jewish community and helps support the Jewish community locally. And they're all sort of connected. So every few years, what will happen is there will be a survey about Judaism, right? I don't know if you know the stats of Judaism in North America. Guess what the fastest growing group of Jews are?
Haredi.
Okay, you think Haredi? Orthodox? What? Anyone else? Want to guess?
Masorti, not Masorti.
Conservative?
Yeah. No, the other one.
Reform?
Begins with M. What's it called?
Masorti.
Right. I don't think they have that in North America. I don't know. Actually, the fastest growing group of Jews, and this is very sad, are unaffiliated Jews, right? Mm. The fastest growing group of Jews are Jews that are saying, we're opting out of Judaism, right? We're not interested. And you have to also understand that generally when when these surveys are done, it's usually the person themselves labels themselves, right? So they'll label themselves Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, unaffiliated, etc. Right? So it's not that someone else is deciding who is or isn't unaffiliated. It is, the surveys generally say that these are the Jews that are saying we're unaffiliated, right? For whatever reason, but Judaism is not important to us.
Will communities fill these questionnaires out?
Sorry?
Will they fill the questionnaires out?
Some will. Haredi community is large because they look visibly different. You can pick out a Haredi Jew from a non-Jew in a crowd. You cannot pick out look, it's not a discussion about, yes, it is sad. It's not a discussion about, like I was thinking, even in the UK, right? So the UK, I think, is a little bit further behind in terms of assimilation than North America. But, okay, so you have a Jewish community in London, you have a Jewish community in Manchester, even South Manchester, but you go outside of that, and it's a sad state. It's not reassuring, right? So what happens usually is these surveys will come out, and then people will react to them, and very often the federations will sit down and they will say, what can we do to ensure Jewish continuity, right? And as a professional who used to work in North America, it was often a question that I was kind of brought to. Let's keep that question in mind, because again, this question kind of comes up in the Purim story. So let me give you a quick update of where we are. So in the Purim story, right? So what happens is the Purim story is Haman, who let me just give you a quick update. So Achashverosh throws a party. Mordechai, who is the head of the Jewish people, tells the Jews, don't go to the party. It's not appropriate for Jewish people to go to. The Jews ignore him. They go to the party anyway. Achashverosh gets drunk, asks for his wife to come. His wife refuses. Vashti, who is his wife refuses. And he turns around to his ministers and he says, what should I do? Okay, my wife refused to come. What should I do? So Haman, who is one of the ministers, says, look, it looks absolutely terrible if everybody knows that you asked your wife to come to you and she said no. So this is what you should do. You should kill her. So Achashverosh says, great idea. He has her killed. Yeah. It's off to a great start, the story, right? Wow. So what happens is he gets over his hangover and he realizes what he's done. He's like, oh my goodness, now what? Right? So Haman comes back and he tells him, look, I'll give you advice. Throw a beauty pageant in your entire empire. Get all the girls to come and choose a beautiful girl. You'll have a new wife. So that's what he does. He makes a compulsory beauty pageant and all the girls come. Mordechai has a niece called Esther. And Mordechai tells Esther, look, you're going to have to go to the palace and, for Achashverosh, but don't tell anyone that you're Jewish. Esther listens. She goes, happens to be Achashverosh chooses her as his new wife, right? Now, Achashverosh and Esther, Esther's the new wife, the new queen. Meanwhile, Haman is rising. He becomes prime minister, and he is a little bit of an egomaniac, or actually very much an egomaniac. And he insists that everyone in Persia bows down to him. Everyone does. He makes it a law. Everyone does, except Mordechai. Mordechai refuses to bow down. He says, I bow down before God. I do not bow down before people. Which actually is a fascinating life thing. It's like, I please God, I don't please people. Imagine how much healthier our lives would be if we ran by that, mantra in our head. So what happens is Haman is wild, and he says, I'm going to wipe out all the Jews. He goes to Achashverosh, he asks for permission to wipe out all the Jews. Achashverosh gives him permission, and he sets a date. He draws a lottery. He sets a date on the 15th of Adar when he's going to wipe out all the Jews. Okay, the Jews hear about it, distraught, right? Complete annihilation. It's terrifying. Mordechai goes to Esther and he says to Esther, he sends a message to Esther and he says, listen, Esther, you are placed in the palace, right? He says, go and beg Achashverosh to save the Jews, right? Like, he's almost telling her, like, look at it, all the Jews are being threatened to be wiped out, and you're the one Jew that's placed in a position where you can help. Now, what does Esther answer? And I'm actually going to read it out to you because it's the words itself are very interesting. Okay, so Mordechai says, go to the king, and Esther says to him, she says, all the king's servants and the people of the king's province know that any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court who is not summoned, his law is, 1, to be put to death, right? Except for the one to whom the king shall extend the golden scepter so that he may live. Now I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days, right? So what is Esther telling Achashverosh here, Mordechai here? She's telling him, listen, Achashverosh has a rule, right? That if he doesn't invite you in and you go to him uninvited, he could kill you unless he extends his golden scepter, right? Now, I haven't seen him for 30 days. So what she's really selling him behind here is she's saying that, look, you're asking me to go and do this, but this is the risk. If I go in and the king decides not to extend his golden scepter, I'm going to be killed. And we're talking about someone who has a track record, right? He's killed his previous wife, right? He could kill her. And she's saying, I haven't done it. I haven't been summoned for 30 days. Like, he's going to want me at some point. Also, the other thing to bear in mind is this conversation took place Pesach time. So it's 11 months ahead of time. So it's almost like she's telling him, look, let's just wait and see what happens, right? What would you say that time? If you were Mordechai, Think about it. you're the head of the Jewish people. You're worried about the Jews all being wiped out. Esther is the one person who you feel could actually, save the Jewish people, and she's kind of like, too risky. What would you say to her?
I think because you would say that she's representing the Jews and the only one that is close enough to the Hashgarosh to.
Yes, she is. She's there's no one else that can do it, right?
And
There's no.
With Vashti, he did it when he was drunk. He won't necessarily be drunk when.
So maybe he'll make more level-headed decisions. Yeah. Okay, you could say that to her. That's a good argument to make. What else would you say to her? I want to read it out to you. The worst motivational speech in all of history, I believe. Definitely the worst I've ever heard. Anyway, so Mordecai said, "Do not imagine in your soul that you will be able to escape in the king's palace any more than the rest of the Jews." Okay, so the first kind of thing he's kind of saying makes sense. He's telling her, look, Esther, I get it's a risk, but you have to understand that the other way is also a risk, because don't imagine that you're going to be fine in the king's palace. But then he says, "For if you persist in keeping quiet at a time like this, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another place, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether it was for such a time as this that you attain the royal position." Which is like, to me, it doesn't make sense at all, because what he's basically telling her is, look, if you don't go, you might be killed anyway. But and also you should know that if you don't go, the Jews are going to be saved anyway. What would you say at that point? Put yourself in Esther's place, right? Like, going is an incredible act of bravery. You're risking your life, right? You're literally risking your life. There is probably a 50-50 chance, or maybe even more, that the king is not going to stretch out his golden scepter. And then Mordecai tells you, if you don't go, we're going to be saved anyway. What would you say? I'll give you a tiny little analogy. Imagine you're really tired one day. Stretch your imagination here. And the kitchen's a mess. Stretch it a little bit more, right? And you kind of look at the kitchen, you're like, I really should clean it up. What motivates you to clean up the kitchen at that point?
Just that you don't have to walk in the morning and see.
You don't have to walk in. You don't have to walk in. But sorry, it's not just because you're there. It's because you know that if I don't do it,
no one else will.
No one's going to do it. Right? I'm going to walk downstairs to a filthy kitchen, right? Now imagine if someone turned around to you and said, look, you could do it, but if you don't do it, I'm going to do it. How motivating would that be to you? You'd be like, wow, now that's a threat, right?
But then you think, you might as well do it because they won't do it good enough anyway.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, but here he said, so you're kind of answering that maybe 1 minute. So let's find out before we what Esther's response is. Okay. So what's Esther's response is, she says, "Go, assemble all the Jews that are to be found in Shushan, fast for me, do not eat or drink for 3 days, and I with my maids will fast also. Then I will come to the kings, though it is unlawful, and if I perish, I perish." Right? It's so, this conversation. Is it just me, or do you also find it a little bit peculiar? It's a bit strange. Like, what is going on here? Mordecai asked her to do something, which we can understand, right? She's the queen. We would also say that, look, how do you know why you were chosen to be the queen? Maybe this is it. How did she
become the queen if he wasn't the king?
Who?
Haman.
Because she married Achashverosh.
Oh, sorry,
Haman was the prime minister, right? Yeah. We would also say that, look, how do you know this? Maybe this is why you were chosen to be the queen, right? Then she brings up a legitimate concern, saying, look, I might be killed, right? And if I'm killed, not only am I killed, but then where are you left, right? So she's saying maybe it's better to wait. And what does Mordecai say? Mordecai says, listen, if you don't do it, we're going to get saved anyway. But maybe you and your father's house will be perished, right? Which is another question of what's going on there. And then what does she say? What does she say? She says, fine, I'll do it. I'll do it. Just go pray for me, and I'll fast and I'll do it. What does she hear there that motivated her to do it? Any ideas?
She doesn't want anyone else's life to be put at risk, so she's happy to sacrifice herself.
But then she would have been happy to do it before he said something. There was something in the conversation that he said, and I'll ask you another question. I'll think, why is Mordecai saying we're going to be saved anyway? How does he know? I mean, sometimes people say, people go through tough times and people turn around to them and say, it's all going to be okay, right? But usually when people say that, it's because they don't know what else to say, right? They don't say, like, Mordecai is the leader of the Jewish people. Like, why is he turning around and saying we're going to be saved anyway?
Was there a prophecy?
Yes. Well done. So the reason why Mordecai is saying that is because he knows for a fact that the Jewish people are going to be saved, right? How does he know it? Because as Charlotte told us, there is a prophecy, right? God gave us a prophecy that there will always be a Jewish people. And what's fascinating, if you look at world history and the Jewish people, you look at like other nations compared to Jewish people, the Jewish people are always teetering along at right at the bottom of the chart, because we're like, I don't know, 0.2% or something of the world population. Other populations come and they go and they come and they go and they rise, but like, and we can see already in our history that it doesn't, Mark Twain writes famously that the Jew is immortal. No one understands why the Jew is there, but the Jew is there, right? It doesn't make sense, but we do have a prophecy that there will always be a Jewish people. So that's why when Mordecai turns around to her, he can say it with confidence that we will be saved, right? Because I know that we'll be saved. So if we're going to be saved anyway, right? Then why should she risk her life?
Because God doesn't just save, you have to make efforts to go out and save yourself.
But why? We have a promise.
If it's like a joke, isn't there, where a guy's drowning and then there's a helicopter and and it's like, but God didn't save me. Yeah, how many things do you think he brought to you to try and save yourself?
Yes.
So it's kind of that concept of you've got to do something about it. I can guide you through it, but you can't just sit and expect me to just do it for you.
Yeah, I get that you can't. You're right that you can't. My question on that is why not? If God has a promise that there will always be a Jewish future, why can't I just sit back and relax and be assured that my kids are going to be Jewish, my grandchildren are going to be Jewish? Why couldn't Esther turn around and say, look, there's a promise, so God will save us. Why do I have to risk my life?
You have to work it.
Why?
It's not faith. You've got to have faith in you.
Yeah, but why do we have, if we know, if you know 100% that your kitchen is going to get clean tonight, why on earth would you get up and do the kitchen? Why?
Motivation.
But the only
Peace of mind.
Peace of mind. But it's not peace of mind to risk your life. Why? So here it is. The answer is in the next sentence that he says to her. He says, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another place, while you and your father's house will perish. So here's a very cool backstory to the Purim story, is that Haman was a descendant of Amalek. Esther was a descendant of King Shaul. King Shaul was tasked with wiping out Amalek, who were enemies of the Jews. He did not fulfill God's mitzvah at the time, and as a result of it, he left one person alive from the Amalek people. As a result of it, Haman was a descendant of them, right? So Mordecai is telling her, yes, Esther, there is a promise that there will be a Jewish future. That promise is on the Jewish people as a whole. There's no promise on the individual, right? He's saying, will you be a part of that future, Esther? That is your choice. That is your decision. Right? So what does it mean? What does it practically mean? And he's saying, look, maybe this is the moment you were put in the palace so that, number one, you as a descendant of King Shaul can have that opportunity to rectify what your ancestor, that's the word, ancestor did wrong. But also, up to this point, Esther was, if you listen to read the Megillah, you'll see, and you want to sort of get a sense for who Esther was. Up until this point in the Megillah, she was this passive personality who did exactly what Mordecai says. She hears this conversation and she changes. She becomes the heroine of the Purim story, right? We all know that the heroine of the Purim story is Queen Esther. She risked her life. She saved the Jewish people. Why? Because she heard the call. And that is the question that we have. That is the question that we live with every single day. Is there going to be a Jewish future? 100% yes. So why do we have to fight so hard? Because there will be a Jewish future. But will I be part of that Jewish future? Will my children be part of that Jewish future? Will my grandchildren be part of that Jewish future? That is totally dependent on the decisions, the choices, and the choices that we make, right? If we make that choice to opt in and to say, Judaism is important to me, I want to continue the chain, right? And I would encourage anyone I want to continue the chain because we went through the Holocaust, to widen that, because we want to continue the chain because it is a privilege to be a Jew. It is a responsibility to be a Jew, right? We have a rich heritage. We have a value system that has influenced the world, right? A lot of Western values, if you look at them, equality of life, etc., they all come from the Torah, right? Which is a whole nother conversation, right? Our heritage is rich and beautiful, and on a very individual level, it adds so much meaning to our life. But if we want to be a part of that, and if we want to pass that on to our children and our grandchildren and their whatever, then and our souls for eternity, then we have to answer the call the same way that Esther answers the call. And every single one of us gets that call. Maybe it's not as dramatic. Maybe it's not as dramatic as we have to say, that whatever, I have to risk my life. But we all have to risk something, risk our comfort a little bit to opt into Judaism. And that's when we get to decide whether we will be part of the Jewish future or not.
But I think most people, not everyone, but most people have hit a crossroads, haven't they, when it comes to potentially Judaism?
So tell me more about that.
So some people might, engage with, certain relationships that might not be on the path that they necessarily would have taken, or decisions on schools, or there's lots of different things that you might come to a crossroad and think, actually, I've got to make my own decision about whether I want to continue with Judaism.
100%.
That makes sense.
Yes, 100%. I think we all have moments like that, and I think we all have multiple moments like that in our
Whatever
life.
those moments might be, there is definitely those elements.
Yeah. Someone that I know from Calgary, he had I may have shared his story with you. Yes.
I know the story.
Yeah, you know the story, right? Again, he had a moment.
I can say that in sexy she got.
I know. I was waiting for someone to just describe it. I hope he's not
very
listening.
beautiful wife.
I hope him and his wife are not listening to this class, because that would be slightly embarrassing. But I don't know. Maybe he'll enjoy that tagline. But again, he had a moment, where he kind of had to say to himself that, look, I'm given an opportunity to go and explore Judaism. And what motivated him was, at that point in his life, he had left the Jewish community. He had nothing to do with Judaism. And I can't remember what happened. And he listened to that call. He heard that call, and he started to become more involved. We had a moment like that in when we were living in Vancouver. It was a moment like that as well. We were both working in fantastic organizations. We were both, really, really, thank God, impacting people. Our financially, everything was great in terms of our job. And we had and my oldest son was starting high school, and he was going to go into high school with one other religious kid in his year group. And we realized there just wasn't enough infrastructure. And I remember that what motivated me was, I remember I didn't want to turn around when he was 18 and regret not moving. And that's what motivated me. We moved to Manchester 5.5 years ago. We both had no jobs. We were willing to go into business and do whatever to make it work for our kids. And I don't regret it. I look back and I say, firstly, I don't regret it because, from a Jewish point of view, because I know I did my bit, right? Whatever my kids end up choosing, I know I did my bit, and I don't regret it because it's such an incredible thing to be able to turn around to your kids and say, I gave it all up because I wanted you to have the opportunities that you have. So, and I think, you know, we have bigger moments like that, but I think every single day we have moments like that. You know, every single day when we choose to see God in our life, when we choose how we choose to celebrate Shabbat. Right? That's a moment every single week, right? Wherever you are in your Jewish journey, if you are not lighting candles and you make a decision to light candles, that's a moment where you decide to say, I'm going to put my Judaism in front of my comfort, right? If you are already doing it, but you decide to take it up a level or whatever it is, or to put more energy into what you're already celebrating, these are all moments in our life that keep on coming up, where we get to answer the call just like Esther, right? And what's interesting is when you read the Megillah, it's really a fascinating story to read. One of the things that people don't often realize is that it took place over 9 years, right? So you can read the Megillah, right? And you can instantly pick apart the key moments, right? But if you're living through it, you don't know what those key moments are, right? Maybe she may not have, Esther, when she had this conversation, she may not have realized, hold on a second, this is a turning point in my life, right? So sometimes those decisions that we have to make they don't necessarily seem big at that time, right? And sometimes it's like the small decisions that we have to make, like the small times where we kind of say, you know what, this isn't totally comfortable for me, but I'm gonna choose it because Judaism is important to me, and I want to have that Jewish future for myself and my soul, and for my future generations. If that's relevant, then you know, sometimes those are the moments that what's the word? You know, and they snowball into the bigger moments that really end up changing our lives. And if you think about it, like Esther, you know, what became her role isn't, you know, we talk a lot about the future generations, but really she's the one, right? She's the one that became Queen Esther because she made that decision to opt into Judaism. And I think that's you know, it's nice to hear the Purim story, but it's also nice to kind of ask ourselves the Purim questions. And one of the Purim questions is, you know, yes, there's going to be a Jewish future. Yes, there are going to be Jews in 2300 or whatever it is. But is my family going to be a part of the Jewish future? That's a question that I'm going to have to ask myself, and I'm going to have to answer by how much effort and energy I put into my Judaism. Thank you for listening. I'm currently offering all listeners a free strategy call so that you can get clarity on how you can get what you want in life. Check the show notes for how to access this offer. Thank you again for listening. Please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast, and please share, because sharing is caring. Thank you and have a wonderful day.